With Dune Part 3 on the horizon, director Denis Villeneuve is finally pulling back the curtain on the darkest chapter of Paul's reign with the Holy War. It's a war that reshapes the galaxy, a war that defines the myth of Muad'Dib, and a war that was only talked about in Frank Herbert's Dune Messiah book, which was set 12 years after the events of the first book. So to elevate both the impact and scale of the final film narratively, the director is now bringing the jihad to the big screen, and he's doing so during a 17-year time jump from the end of the last film. The Holy War is not just a series of battles, but an emotional and political period that sits at the very heart of what Dune Messiah explores. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing the Holy War, which was featured in footage from the Dune Part 3 trailer, and breaking down how director Denis Villeneuve might go about adapting it for the film. There will be big spoilers from the Dune Messiah book included, so if you haven't read Frank Herbert's novels, then I would recommend watching one of my other Dune videos instead. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my content surrounding Dune Part 3, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating and subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's discuss the Holy War in Dune Part 3. So when Frank Herbert wrote Dune Messiah, he deliberately refused to depict the Holy War in real time. Instead, he presented it as a historical scar, a galaxy-wide trauma that Paul Atreides has already unleashed by the time the novel begins. Billions have died in his name, entire planets have been subjugated, and the Fremen Jihad has reshaped the political order of the Imperium. Herbert's choice was intentional through this, in that the Holy War was framed as a burden for Paul. It's the weight that crushes Paul's soul, the shadow that follows every conversation, and the moral consequence of a messiah who never wanted to be worshipped. Again, the jihad is constantly mentioned in Messiah, but never shown, existing as a haunting absence and a reminder that the universe has already paid the price for Paul's rise. This is the tragedy at the heart of the book, as Paul sees every possible future, and yet he cannot prevent the bloodshed committed in his name. But when it comes to the new adaptation of that book, it's important to note that director Denis Villeneuve is a filmmaker and not a novelist. Cinema demands images and a level of cinematic urgency for the narrative, and this trilogy to feel like a culmination. And the Dune Part 3 trailer makes it clear that Villeneuve is going to visualize the Holy War that Herbert didn't go too much into, and so far it doesn't look like it's going to be just a small recap of the war. And that's because we get multiple scenes of planetary sieges, glimpses of a galaxy torn apart by Fremen conquest, and then also some additional shots from years prior to the Messiah storyline. Those include the moment with Paul and his mother, the Lady Jessica, on Caladan, and the scene with him and Chani as they talk about naming their children, Ganima and Leto. So there's clearly going to be a bit of expansion in Villeneuve's film when it comes to the time in between the two books. And like I mentioned at the start of the video, that gap is longer in the film as the director has expanded from 12 to 17 years between Part 2 and Part 3. When it comes to the trailer footage, we see Paul leading a legion of Fremen through a smoky, war-torn landscape. We also see artillery being used in another shot. And then soon after those flashes of the war, we get footage of what looks to be Stilgar leading an elite group of Fremen warriors against soldiers wearing Japanese-inspired armor. In at least a few of these shots, I think we're seeing either the conquest of Naraj or the conquest of Eimfale, important moments from the Holy War that are mentioned in the Dune Messiah book. The conquest of Naraj is particularly a resonant moment because of the character of Farouk, who has already had a released poster for the new film and is someone who embodies the human cost of Paul's empire. Frank Herbert deliberately kept Naraj's fall at a distance, and it's mentioned in fragments and treated like a footnote in the chronicles of the Holy War. But through his story, Farouk provides a level of emotional weight from the aftermath of the war. Naraj itself is one of the many worlds that resisted the spread of Muad'Dib's religion and paid the price for it. The Fremen war machine, sharpened by desert hardship and sanctified by religious fervour, overwhelms the planet with the same terrifying inevitability that defined Paul's entire reign. Herbert doesn't linger on troop movements or tactical brilliance, but he frames Naraj as another world crushed beneath the momentum of a holy war that Paul foresaw but could not prevent. It's a victory that adds to Paul's legend while simultaneously deepening his despair. The character of Farouk centrally embodies the human and Fremen cost of Paul's empire more clearly than almost anyone else. Farouk is a Fremen elder, someone who believed in the dream of Muad'Dib, but now lives with the grief of losing a son who died fighting in Paul's name. And what makes him compelling is that he doesn't rage, he doesn't accuse, but he mourns with a kind of quiet dignity that forces Paul to confront the consequences of his own legend. Farouk represents the generation of Fremen who helped build the empire but never imagined the tidal wave of violence that it would unleash. He has respect for the man he once followed, but sorrow for what that loyalty cost him. In this sense, Farouk becomes a mirror to Paul as he reflects the tragedy of being a messiah who cannot control the faith built around him. And when Farouk is ultimately killed by Scytale as part of the conspiracy, his death lands with symbolic weight. It reminds us that even the innocent and loyal are swept up in the machinery of Paul's destiny that was set in motion. So while Farouk's presence in the novel may be brief, and his description of the jihad is as well, the emotional impact of it is enormous. He humanizes the Holy War, grounding the narrative in personal loss and showing us the quiet suffering that exists beneath the myth of Muad'Dib. In a story obsessed with power, prophecy, and political manipulation, Farouk is the reminder that every empire, no matter how righteous its beginnings, leaves real people behind in its wake. So in reference to Farouk and the conquests he talks about, I think it demonstrates the scale of Paul's empire and what it has cost. The conquest of Naraj demonstrates the unstoppable force of the Fremen jihad, and Farouk reveals the fragility of the people crushed beneath it. Herbert sharpens the central theme of Dune Messiah in that even the most triumphant empire is built on the suffering of individuals, and that no amount of prescience can shield a ruler from the moral consequences. So one of the most compelling aspects of the trailer is how it could be suggesting how Villeneuve will structure the Holy War in Dune Part 3. He might not just be using these scenes as background or a prologue to the rest of the narrative, but as a bigger narrative engine within the film. I think that based on the extended look at the war in the trailer, that the film might be weaving it throughout the narrative as a series of recurring flashbacks. With the amount of war footage we get, and also by knowing what Villeneuve has said in previous interviews, it makes me think that this is the route he might be going in. Essentially, he may be intending to properly bridge the gap between the end of Part 2 and the start of the Messiah book by showing the conquests and that period in more detail. This approach makes sense, as Dune Messiah as a book is a political thriller, a psychological drama, and a meditation on power, and it's not considered an action-heavy book. But with Villeneuve knowing that the audience is coming off of the scale seen in Part 2, I think he'll want to continue that epic scope. So by using a dedicated flashback timeline to satisfy that expectation, he can make the story of Messiah feel more impactful, and then at the same time stay faithful to the intimate conspiratorial tone of the book. We'd essentially get all of that in the larger 17 years later arc that takes up the pages of the book. And then a flashback timeline to the war would further allow Villeneuve to externalize Paul's internal torment. So rather than like in the novel where Paul is haunted by the jihad in the past, in the film we'd see the most impactful moments of that time play out. Each flashback could become a manifestation of his guilt, his prescience, and his inability to escape the destiny he foresaw. The Holy War would therefore become a psychological intrusion, a recurring nightmare that interrupts the political intrigue of all the bloodshed. The director has always been known to use scale as emotion, like in the way he adapted the sandworm ride scene in Dune Part 2. So with the Holy War scenes in Part 3, he could follow a similar philosophy, but just split them and the 17 years later scenes apart by time. Yes, they will be massive in scale like we saw in the trailer footage, but they will be primarily anchored by character and storytelling. Paul leading his Fremen charge will be less about victory and more about the emptiness it creates in the future. A structure like this could allow Villeneuve to show the galaxy reacting to the jihad years later. We'll see the fear in the Great Houses, the desperation of the conspirators like Irulan and Mohaim, and the political instability that makes Paul's empire so fragile. The Holy War would essentially become the connective tissue between the past and the present, the reason the conspiracy exists, the reason Paul is vulnerable, and the reason the story of Messiah unfolds the way it does. So ultimately, I think Villeneuve's adaptation of the war will honour the intent of Frank Herbert while expanding on the visual language of the story. The Holy War can be depicted as vast, terrifying, and morally complex. It can act as a recurring presence that haunts every moment that takes place beyond it. And by the time the story reaches its conclusion, the audience would truly understand why Paul chooses the path he does. But that was my video discussing the adaptation of the Holy War in Dune Part 3. It's clear that director Denis Villeneuve is expanding upon Dune Messiah, taking the Holy War that Herbert skipped past and weaving it into the emotional fabric of the new film. And it looks like he's doing so not just for spectacle, but for the living, breathing consequences of Paul's rise to power. Every battle we see and every Fremen warrior fighting under the banner of Muad'Dib can all feed into the tragedy that defines this final chapter of Villeneuve's big screen saga. And that's what I think can make this adaptation so compelling. Villeneuve isn't glorifying the jihad as he's interrogating it, showing us the cost to the galaxy, the cost to the Fremen, and most importantly, the cost to Paul himself. By presenting the Holy War through flashbacks, through visions, through fragments of memory, I think he's turning it into a psychological landscape, a place Paul can't escape and a moment the audience cannot ignore. And when this final film finally arrives, I think we're going to fully understand why Paul becomes the figure he does, why the conspiracy forms around him, and why the story of Messiah is ultimately a story of collapse. Whether that be through the collapse of a myth, the collapse of an empire, or the collapse of a man who saw too much of the future to save himself. So if Villeneuve does succeed, then I think he could pull off one of the most complex tragedies in science fiction. A story not about the rise of a hero, but about the unbearable weight of being one. But let me know down below in the comment section what you thought of the first trailer for Dune Part 3, alongside how you think the director will go about adapting the Holy War. For much more videos and breakdowns, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like, rating, and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.